Hello, humans. It's nighttime. We start talking about UVs. This is going to be sort of a longish video because it's been a while since I've actually had to explain something that I had trouble understanding in my like. This was the hardest thing for me to understand. Not because it was difficult to comprehend, but because there was a severe lack of explanation. It's like it seemed as if everybody knew what UVs are. I'm gonna assume that you don't, and that's why you're watching this. So, if you think about this, right, there's all these terms flying around: normal maps, mip maps, bump maps, occlusion maps, ambient maps, texture maps, all this, like the old, like light maps, tons and tons of maps. And whenever people talk about maps, they also talk about UVs. I mean, and that's easier to understand, right? Because a map is something that has to be referenced and related to words, and a UVs are your maps. But are they? So how do they connect to your maps, and what do they have to do with maps? And without, why wouldn't your maps work without the UVs? I mean, wouldn't it just makes a lot more sense that you could just paint something with a color of, I don't know, with the brick color or something that's gonna be fine, right? It doesn't make much sense how they work, and I think like I've gone into a little bit of effort here so that you can understand and I can really, explain to you what this whole story is. So if I go ahead here and I just unhide my just small polygon here I've created, and I had this picture, and basically I applied the picture. And this is what a texture is. It's simply a picture that is being taken by someone, usually very high resolution. So if I go ahead over here and go on my back view so that I can see it properly, and I probably need to hide my camera. For some reason it's unhidden. Um, if we go ahead and take a look here, what do we have is essentially someone stared a piece of wood, a plank, timber, whatever, and he basically took a picture at 90 degrees from the top. Like he basically was looking at it the way I'm looking at it now. All right. By the way, if you were gonna be using a texture that is not free, I recommend you pay for it. Not because somebody's gonna find out and hunt you down for using a picture of that they've taken of a particular plank, right? I mean, they probably they could, but nobody's gonna bother. It's just common courtesy. So if it's like a $2 or $3 for one texture map, pay the man because he went through considerable trouble making it seamless, etc., etc. Now this particular texture actually costs $30, and I definitely wouldn't pay $30 for this. So I wouldn't use this in the game either. But what I'm saying is that if you're using a texture, try to be legitimate about it. But anyway, back on topic. So I have a 2D picture here, and like this does not really work for me because if I were to make this into a barrel, this wouldn't really this wouldn't really work for me, right? So here I've got a cube. Now this cube, I know um, it's a very complicated geometry here that I've created, but let me just bear with me for a second. So if I wanted to make this cube look like this wood here, currently I've got this square because if I look straight down on it, I mean, I'm not going to get a lot of detail, right? So, well, what are my options? I could use a shrink wrap, right? So if I go ahead and just move this, position this, so it doesn't really matter where I position this, but let's say I select this, and then I go ahead and pop off the deform menu real quick, and I shrink wrap this, and it just disappears because I need to move in. So here's my shrink wrapped model, right? This does not really work too well because if you take a look at this now, obviously, if I add more faces to my original, um, model, I'll get a better shrink wrap, right? So let me just actually go ahead and unshrink wrap this and go into multi-cut tool. I believe actually if I insert a couple of edges here, let me just select this. Oops, no. I think I could select. Let me just go ahead and select, insert several edge loops. Insert edge loop. 2. I believe there was a way to insert more than one edge at a time. It's just for some reason I can't find out what was the trick to it. Maybe if I go into actual mesh here, let me just see. Sorry, mesh, edit mesh, edge loops. Now there was I'm almost 100% certain you could insert, like you can insert 10, 15 edges. I believe it was from the insert edge loop toolkit here, but I needed to go into my object and for some tool options, my bad, sorry. Let me just go ahead back into my insert edge loop tool, and over here I open up. So currently here I have number of edge loops, multiple edge loops, and I'm gonna include 20. Sorry about that, guys. It's been a while since I've used an actual tool here for an edge loop. So there's one, and then there's the other. So I've got 40 edge loops essentially on this thing, right? Now I'm gonna obviously go ahead and just deselect this, and now I've got a lot of faces to work with, right? I'm gonna delete the history on this thing, and so if I go ahead and create a shrink wrap now, actually the opposite, this way. For crying out loud, this way, sorry. And actually go ahead and not just parallel to axes, but towards the center, and I create this, you will notice that now I'm not getting that good of a deformity here. Now obviously I could go ahead and play around with this, but at the end of the day, this does not really serve my purpose too well because I'm having issues, and I could try different things like towards inner object, and if I apply, still gonna get these weird things. I could offset this maybe a little bit and try to, I don't know, closest. This would sort of wrap it around me, but then, you know, even though I have an offset, I still get problems. Now you can imagine what I'm trying to do here, right? I'm trying to dress this square with a 2D object, and it just, look, it's weird. It's hard to do it because, you know, you have to actually go ahead and do this from the bottom, from the front, not just from just from one side. So this is definitely not what I want, and this is a futile attempt. So there's another option, another approach to this, and that is called mapping the UVs. What does that mean? Well, if you think about this, right, this is essentially an object, and if I go ahead and simply unhide my other plane, which is the same plane, I just duplicated it first time around. If I go ahead and take a look at this object, like really closely, let's just go ahead actually and activate the wireframe unshaded. Okay, so if I take a look at this, now I've creased these edges for a purpose, for a reason, so you can see them more clearly. Now think about this. If you want to wrap a 2D object, let's say a picture, onto a cube, it is simply impossible, right? You basically, you need to upgrade your 2D object into a 3D object in order for this to work, right? And like we just tried this, and sure, it does work to a degree, but it's never like you could do it, but it's like trying to wrap up I don't know, it's like trying to wrap a potato in tinfoil. You know, you're gonna get it, but you're not gonna get it, you know, super close. And that's the only problem, right? Plus, you need to have the right size square, right? If this is too big, it's gonna, it's gonna overlap on itself inside, right? When you wrap it, because you imagine if this is a piece of paper, you just slam it on top. Like if you go ahead and just slam this onto your object, then it starts to bend, right? This is like a cloth. Now, obviously, if I had end cloth, I'm not sure if I do. I don't have end cloth here, so I can't actually demonstrate this. But if this was end cloth, you'd know what I mean. Basically, like a sheet of paper. Okay, but there's also another alternative here which we're missing right now, and that is to downgrade this object into a 2D object. So instead of upgrading this piece of paper, right, the picture, instead of upgrading it to 3D, we're going to downgrade our 3D into 2D. How does that happen? If you look about this, you could always simply imagine this is a box, and you can open it, right? You can lift the lid, and if you can lift the lid, this means that you suddenly have a plane, one more plane. So I actually made a little animation so that you understand this a little bit more clearly. So here we go. If I go ahead and lift my lid, now I did not optimize this. Obviously, it looks like shit, but the fact of the matter is that I just lifted a lid. Right, this is my lid. Now all of a sudden, if we take a look, I've got double the space. So I could technically just keep going, right? And eventually I will be able to open up my cube all the way, right? So if I go ahead and try to open up the bottom now, here, and I open it up as well, boom. So now I have 3 faces of my cube are in 2D, in a 2D form already. Okay, so this is 2D, and these 3 faces are in 2 dimensions. They're in the same axis. Well, maybe I did not exactly, align this correctly, maybe for illustrative purposes, but you can see that they are on one axis. Okay, they are on one axis. They do not go in depth. Okay, so it seems very simple that all I got to do now is simply finish opening the rest of these objects. But remember, this still needs to be one object. Okay, so I can't just open this and put it in the air, although technically I could, but this is undesirable. So I need to open this up in a different way. So if I go ahead and open this up like this, right, I'm basically gonna open it on one side, and now I have 4 surfaces. And if I keep going, there's the 5th surface, and that is finally here the 6th face that I have. So currently, if I go take a look, if I go ahead and take a look over here, which I also probably need to have here, I need maybe to put on the X-ray. Not the full X-ray. Oh, no, not the full X-ray, my bad. This is not that good. Maybe I can just X-ray this. I believe it's possible. No, it is not. Okay, forget it for now. I don't want to bother with the material as of yet for X-raying this, but I will, because I do think it's important that, oh, for crying out loud, where's my material attributes? So if I go ahead and simply bump up the transparency, now if you take a look here, you will see that I have, maybe I should have also went ahead and bumped up the ambient color so that you can take a look, have a better look at this. Just, yeah, more incandescent as well, like so. I don't need the ambient color that much. So here's what we're looking at, right? We've got our picture, and this way our cube is currently in a is being projected. If we project this onto our cube, you will see this picture, right? Now this is not ideal. Sorry, in this case, actually, this is probably ideal because everything seems to be together, right? There is no cutaway, although you can see the seams that if we do this in reverse, right? If we do this in reverse, you will see that you have some troubles where these things connect. But for now, let's just assume that this is not correct. We don't like it. So notice that currently, if we were to fold this back together, the seams, sorry, the these waves here would go along the sides of our cube, because this is the top and this is the bottom and these are the sides, right? So this would be a much better setup, right? Although if I wanted to change this and say, okay, I want these lines to be running along my top and bottom, like from top to bottom, all I have to do is simply rotate this. And now I have a different set of coordinates, right? So in this case, in the first situation, my X and Y, right? So this is X and this is Z in this case, but we're going to refer to them as X and Y because this is 2D. So in this case, the texture goes from one side to another, and I'm gonna get the bigger, like the sides of my cube will be the ones that receive this texture. Okay. Now if I go ahead and rotate this, I've changed the topology essentially of what I'm going to be looking at, right? And I am actually going to be projecting this on top of the object. So I'm projecting this, and as you can see, if I put this really where it's supposed to be over here, this is how my texture map would look like if I actually select it. As you can see, there's definitely a way to manipulate my 3D object so that I can actually go ahead and paint over it. Because if we take a look at this, this is not unlike a coordinate system, right? You've got a Y and you got an X. And if you think about this, for any given size, like because size is relative in Maya, right? This could be 5 centimeters, 20 centimeters, right? I could grab these two, I could scale them up, and I can keep scaling them up, and I can keep scaling them up, and I can keep scaling them up, and I could do so to infinite until I hit my culling distance on my camera. So what is it exactly? How can I define size? How can I say, well, this is so big and this big? You use two normal vectors. You normalize both of your vectors, and this goes from 0 to 1, right? And this goes from 0 to 1, right? And I define every point on this 0 to 1 space as a particular, it has its own coordinate, right? This is 0.1 to 0.1. This is 0.2 to 0.2. 0.3 to 0.3. 0.4 to 0.4. 0.5 is right in the middle, right? This is your center, and so on and so forth. In this way, no matter what kind of object I've got, I can always map it to a particular coordinate and it will always be relevant to the size. And I can always, because it's normalized, I can keep scaling it up and down and nobody would be the wiser. No, it wouldn't matter. Okay? So, what does that mean? Well, this means that I've just explained to you the UV maps. This is how a UV map works. Instead of being called an XY, it's called a U and a V. Or I think this is the U and this is the V. Or this is the U and this is the V. I don't know. It's called, the point is that it's a UV map. And, excuse me. And essentially, this is how it all works. You get a 3D object, you cut it apart, right? You unfold this. That's why it's called an unfolding. So you unfold this, and this is how you project your object. Now, there's a couple of things important here. Just because I did this against the texture doesn't mean that I'm done. First of all, if we assume that this is a 2D space, right, and we want our object to actually correspond to a very specific set. Now, this is a texture that applies to everything that is here. Okay, I can move my object around. If I go ahead and just move it over here, I'm going to get a different result. If I move it over here, I'm going to get a different result. If I move it over here, I'm going to get a different result. I can actually have this rotated in some weird fashion, right, and have it diagonally. So my objects, my options here are, limitless. But there's one thing that I am limited by, and that is the space. Because notice, if I go ahead and actually put this back where it belongs, sort of, look, just like this. So if I think about this, my ability to scale this up is actually limited to how big my UV map is. Because if you think about this, this is a 0 to 1. If I go above, I'm going to start basically repeating this exact same texture, right, across each other. Because if you can imagine that there's like one more square and one more square and one more square, and these are essentially, they're called U dimensions, and it's basically the same thing but in different U dimensions. So it's like a grid of these 1 to 0 squares. Imagine a nearly like a 2,000 upwards and however many sideways grid of these. So yeah, you can go any direction, but in general, it is advisable not to do so, especially since Unreal doesn't recognize these extra spaces, not to mention that they're more expensive because every new space requires a new map, a new texture. But anyway, so my ability to change the resolution here is limited for, towards how much space I have. If I'm only going to use this square, I want to use it as efficiently as possible, right? I want to max this out. So I really want to squeeze every bit of detail in. I could be so desperate that I maybe just try to diagonalize this and maybe squeeze even more detail out of this just by increasing the size of my mesh and hoping that basically I fit all of this together. And as you can see, yes, I will get a much more coverage because my shell here, because this is a shell, right? It looks like a shell. My shell here is taking up a lot more space from this square, and therefore it takes up a lot more of my texture, and therefore I display more detail, right? Now, there is actually a small problem with this, and that is the fact that if I have other objects, if this was, let's say, a more complicated object, I would need to fit them all in this texture. Not to mention that if this was something like a head or a hand, so you'd have nails and you'd have eyes and a nose and all of that jazz, you can't necessarily unfold them flawlessly. Okay, you need to make cuts somewhere, because in this case I've made a cut, right? This is my seam, this is my whole seam, right? And in this case, if we take a look at this, yeah, if I suddenly fold this back together, it's going to be obvious where I've made the cut, because the texture is not going to be very seamless there. The same thing goes for things like eyes, but the difference is that an eye has to be cut out, so it would be something like a sphere, but it would have to be on the same texture map. Unless, of course, you want to have a separate texture map for the eyes, which is a huge waste of space. You would probably have something like, let me just go ahead and create a sphere, or let's say a torus, just like this, right? So there's the torus. In this case, I would probably have the torus somewhere here, which is, imagine this is the eye, right? So we'd put the torus, which is our eye, somewhere here, and this would be completely legitimate, okay? Completely legitimate placement. I could have this torus over here, and obviously this isn't unfolded, this is 3D, but imagine that this is how it looks like, okay? So if we take a look at this, this is my eye, and this is my head, and this is my everything else, all that fancy stuff. But if we take a look at this eye over here, it is entirely possible to have a completely separate picture here. Oops. A completely separate picture over here. So if I go ahead and just reference this, actually my bad. It's not part of a freaking thing. I'm just make live. There we go. So if we think about this, I can have a completely different picture over here. It's not going to interfere with my object, right? Because my object is taking all of this space. But over here, all of this space around the object over this space, it's just I'm losing it. So I need to optimize the placements of my parts and all my objects that are actually part of the same scene, for example, and I can afterwards use one texture map, right, to do two things, right? I can have this wooden bit. I just need to use this cross. I don't need this whole square. And then I can add something else, like in Photoshop, for example, and go ahead and just say, all right, well, this square over here is responsible for my eye. So I really don't need the rest of it. So I can go ahead and paint something specifically in this position. Notice that this is the position that counts, because I can move this object around. But currently, I've set up the position, and I say, okay, this is how my square will be positioned. Okay. Let me just unlive this. This is how my square will be positioned, and this is how my circle will be positioned. Sorry, my eye socket will be positioned. And anytime I paint over this particular area with anything, it will be reflected onto the eye socket, right? Or onto the skull, or onto the box in this case, or whatever. So I hope this is a little bit more intuitive and you just understand what I'm talking about. So essentially, we go ahead and just delete this. If we go ahead and just do this from the beginning again, notice my cube, right? Notice my cube, and I'm basically gonna unfold this. I referenced this unfortunately by mistake. Maybe I should keep it referenced because it's black on white, a little bit better, I suppose. all you do is essentially, I'm just going to play this at real time. You basically open these two up, and then you unfold them and you project them against your, against a particular side, right? Okay, so this is one way of doing this. This is one way of doing this. This does not mean that, this is how your shell is being calculated, okay? This is not what happens to the actual object. By that, I mean that if you were to think, think of this object as I'm going to duplicate this actually. If I'm able to select it, I'm going to grab this, I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to scale this up by ever so slightly, just a wee bit, just a wee bit here, right? So I've basically scaled this up a very tiny bit, and I have a particular color, right? Now, if I go ahead and assign a material here, and I assign a UV full, or UV transparent actually. So this is my UV transparent, and I'm going to go ahead and disable the overrides on this. So if we take a look at this now, I actually need to go ahead and select my other object, so I'm going to hide this for a second. Okay, maybe I need to get the overrides done. I somehow lost my material here, which, where's my original cube? Oh, there it is. Okay. See, I even confused myself. So I'm going to hide this. And I believe I duplicated this twice by mistake. Yeah, definitely. I duplicated this twice by mistake. It was my fault. My bad. Let me just see here. Yeah. So this is my original cube. And if I go ahead into this thing's material just real quick, and I pump out the transparency and lower this down so it's completely solid, and maybe pump up everything else so that I can see through, right? And now I go ahead and unhide my object and increase the transparency on it and remove the override. Would also be nice. Just go ahead and take a look. Where did that thing go to? Display overrides. Can I disable? Why can I not disable this? There seems to be an issue here that I'm seeing. Where's my material then? Oh, for some reason I'm on the wrong phone. It doesn't seem to matter what I'm doing here. Okay, let me just delete this real quick then. I'm gonna create a brand new cube. It's as simple as that. There we go. And I need to snap this onto, I'm not gonna snap anything. I'm just gonna say, okay, imagine that this is how it works. And I'm gonna scale this up a little bit. Just a little bit. Okay, right. And now if I go ahead and assign a material to it, and I say UV transparent. So now finally you see what I'm trying to do. I don't know what happened. I think I should have deleted the history on that because there's a bunch of stuff on it in the input channels. But what I'm trying to tell you here is the fact that here, right now, notice that we have a very small shell. There's a very slight difference in size, and it's even smaller in reality, right? I'm just doing this for illustration purposes, but it's very small, and obviously it's right on point, not like right now where I'm just eyeballing this. But this shell, this is like something that's being wrapped around, right? And this is actually what we unfold. This is the unfolding bit, right? So we have something around our object which projects on top of it, right? Here it is. And then from each side, we grab a side, right? And we create a 3D object from this particular projection, right? And then we unfold this 3D object, okay? So if I were to illustrate this even better, maybe I should have had this thing to be this square to be inside this square, so that you can, this cube to be inside this other cube, so that you understand what I'm trying to say here. When you've got these two cubes, okay, one of them defines the other. So this is just one of the cubes in this case is just the coordinates, okay? These are the coordinates for every vertex on this cube. And once I unfold it, right, and I project it onto this screen over here, onto this sheet, these coordinates that I have just unfolded, right? These I just lifted up, okay? So this is the stuff, right? Let's just do this. Let's just do this full on properly, completely correctly. Let's just go ahead and assign my UV full, and this one I'm gonna go ahead into my materials and go material attributes. I asked for material attributes. Where are they? And go into my transparency, and I just pump this down, and I remove the incandescence. I really don't need the incandescence, and I need the transparency up, like so. Unfortunately, they are sharing the same freaking color, the same freaking material. So that is quite unfortunate. So I need to go ahead and select a new material then, like a transparent half. Okay, this makes more sense. Now notice that I have a cube, right? This is what's happening. We have this cube, right? We're lifting up all the coordinates. We blew it up. We took up all of this coordinates. So this corner over here is the same as this corner over here. This corner over here is the same as this corner over here. And then we unfold it, okay? We unfold these two, and then we put them on to a sheet of paper, okay? Now, this exact same, anything on this sheet of paper is mapped onto this cube because we know the coordinates for this cube's vertices, and they respond to a particular coordinate on this UV scale. So this is 1, 1, and so 0 and 1, 0 and 1. And anytime we change something, it's going to go back into our object because whatever we do is going to be transferred, okay? And this is how UV works. This is the idea of UV mapping. Once you have these coordinates here, once Maya and any other computer basically knows what corresponds to what, right? Which pixels, because these are pixels right now, right? These points are 2D and they are pixels. Which of these pixels correspond to which of these vertices, okay? The vertex is a 3D pixel. Well, to be fair, these are actually called texels, but let's just not go in there for now. But just imagine, right? Every pixel is corresponding to a particular vertex, and it's a beautiful solution because it allows you to create detail. Okay, because this is obviously we're going to talk about this later when we go into the Substance Painter, but it's important to understand that just like you do this with the UVs, you can also do this with a very high definition model, high poly model with a lot of detail, and you can do this projection in reverse. With risk of confusing you, let me just put it this way. Because in this situation, we've lifted all of these surfaces, we bloated them up, right? We make them a little bit bigger just so that we can see. But in reality, Maya is just like, okay, so we grab this and we just turn it into a shell, and this is the 2D shell, and we just put it on here, okay? With the high poly object, let's say we wanted to have a high poly object, the detail of that, but we want to put it onto a low poly object so that we save on performance and calculations. This is the same thing that's happening, but in reverse. Instead of having something taken off from the base object, we actually project our high poly object. If you for a second imagine that this red cube over here, that this red cube is the high polygon one, essentially everything gets projected onto this piece of paper here, because we know all of these coordinates. We just need to create fake detail of fake depth with shadows, etc. Just the same way artists, when they when they draw something and you see these 3D drawings on the wall or 3D drawings on the floor. There's some guy who created the Niagara Falls, right? So it's exactly the same way. Now I promise it's going to be a little bit more intuitive once you get into it. But for now, understand this, that a UV is essentially a coordinate system, and this coordinate system collects and stores data for every vertex on your mesh. So that whenever you basically draw something over that position, it's going to transfer onto the same position on the mesh. I hope this was as clear as possible, because I had trouble understanding this, right? And I think I went a little bit overboard explaining this. I believe most of you have gotten it halfway through this video, but I wanted to be 100% certain that you guys understand this, because without proper UVs, you don't have anything. Okay, you don't have a texture. You have shit UVs, you have shit texture. You might as well not bother, okay? Because texturing is important. You need, obviously, once you create something, you need to also make it look like, you know, visually represents whatever it is you've created, okay? Oh yeah, one more thing. It is also important that you understand this, because we're going to be working with the Substance Painter, and everything in Painter begins with the UVs, okay? So the whole software works around the fact that you have UVs done. So make sure that you have your UVs done. And like I said, there's many ways to do this. We're going to look at this in the next video when we go over the UV menu, which, by the way, will be completely gone or be different or be integrated in 2018, because I've seen it in Maya 2018. I just have not seen it in the LT version, because the LT version is still not out. I suppose they're not finished cutting out features in order to make it, you know, less powerful. But I hope that once, you know, like in the very near future, I don't know if I will do this with the 2017 version or wait for 2018 and download it and then play around with the new editor, because it's a brand new editor, right? It's a complete overhaul of whatever it is. It's here, but all these tools are going to remain the same nonetheless. So even if we go over them like this, and they will be, instead of in a menu, will be actually part of the modeling toolkit. If you use the modeling toolkit, they're also integrated in the right mouse menu. Actually, it is as it is right now. You can select these UV shells, which we don't have right now. But we will actually go through this and talk about these projections, like what is this cylindrical, like create a cylindrical, a spherical, a contour stretch. You got these modifies, the unfold, the layouts, the wrap image, the warp image, split UVs, right? These different sets, like what the hell is going on. So we're going to go through all of these, and it's not as intimidating as you expected. It's basically, it's much like cooking, okay? You can do a lot of stuff with a potato, but if you want to make mashed potatoes, you know, there's a particular things that you got to go through if you want to make them. Otherwise, they're not going to be mashed potatoes, right? But there's many ways to cook a potato, and in that very sense, there's many ways to unfold the same thing. One person could unfold this, each square, as they see fit. Someone could actually go ahead and unfold just these faces, right? Just cut around these faces, have these faces. Some other guy could maybe do this in a different way. Everybody's got their own way of cutting apart 3D objects and transforming them into 2D. So you're gonna find your own groove. You're gonna find methods that work for you. But the objective is very simple anyway. This is the objective. All these tools here basically are available to you so that you can fulfill that objective more efficiently. You could pack and cram more stuff in more efficiently. That we're going to talk about textile density and others later in the next video, but just understand this for a second, okay? My advice is, if you still have trouble figuring this out, grab a piece of tinfoil, right? Grab a piece of tinfoil and wrap that tinfoil around your hand. Now unwrap the tinfoil and take a look at the detail that is left on the tinfoil. You've literally just created a bump map, okay? Or a normal map. Well, it depends on what you're doing. There's a slight difference, but normal maps are technically better than bump maps. But you've just created a bump map, and not only that, but you also have the coordinates of your wrinkles on the hand, right? They will be on this tinfoil, and this is exactly what you're doing with these objects here, with the square, with these other stuff. So make sure to essentially just understand this. Right, understand this. Right, I'll see you guys in the next video when we go into the UV editor, UV sets, and I actually start talking about, the painter stuff, and we'll get into this in the next video. All right, bye bye.